Order, order. We start with questions. Secretary of State for Wales, Rebecca Smith.
Question number 1, Mr. Speaker.
Secretary of State.
Mr. Speaker, I'm sure the whole House will wish to join me in sending our deepest sympathy to the family, friends and neighbours of Joanne Penny, who was callously murdered in Talbot Green on Sunday, a shocking and horrific crime. We have protected the smallest businesses and more than doubled the employment allowance to £10,500, meaning that over half of small and micro businesses will pay less or no national insurance contributions at all. And in Wales, small and medium-sized enterprises account for 99.3% of total enterprises.
Rebecca Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Businesses across Wales, like those also in my constituency of South West Devon, are being hit not only by Labour's job tax, but also increasing minimum wage, rising costs and other business tax increases. Each of these alone would force many to reduce their workforce, but the combination of all three means businesses are thinking twice about filling job vacancies or creating new posts. What reassurances can the Minister give to businesses across Wales, and indeed like Circles in my constituency, that their business has a promising future between now and the next election, when the Labour budget is showing them the complete opposite?
Can I thank the honourable member for her question? If the party opposite cares so much about employment and business in Wales, then perhaps she should explain to her colleagues in the Senedd why they voted last week to block thousands of new apprenticeships and over £300 million of support for businesses in Wales. Her party voted against it.
Oh, right, let us go to the front bench. Show Secretary of State Minns Davis.
Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Secretary of State. Who is she battling for, Kazakhstan or Wales? Due to Labour's political choices, countless jobs in Wales are at risk due to the national insurance rise. It's clear to see the damaging impact it's having in the Minister's own backyard, with reportedly over 1,800 jobs at risk at Cardiff University, among many sectors who are desperately trying to stay afloat due to the Welsh Government's jobs tax, the Labour Government's impact on the Welsh economy. With Cardiff University ploughing on with their Kazakhstan campus, can the Right Honourable Lady be happy with the offshoring of these roles in this sector and many others because of the fallout of the autumn budget continuing?
Thursday.
I'm not sure where the honourable member has got this idea about outsourcing jobs from. It was her party that told our universities across the country to go out and recruit international students, which they did. And now, because of that, and because of what's happened under her last government's watch, those international students are not coming anymore. But she should again look to her colleagues in the Senedd. Education budget, her party voted against. She needs to talk to her colleagues in the Senedd.
Right, we come to David Chabot, Liberal Democrat spokesperson.
Mr. Speaker, the national insurance increase is set to hit high streets in Wales hard, with many traders saying that they will be laying off staff as a result. Last week, the government announced £100 million worth of funding to be spent on reinvigorating Welsh high streets, but no towns in the Swansea, Neath or Ammon valleys were included on that list. Can the Secretary of State clarify the criteria that was used to select the successful towns, and whether or not areas like Ystalyfera can expect to benefit from future funding? Because that's one high street that's certainly worth investing in.
Can I thank the honourable gentleman for his question? The criteria for the announcement last week is publicly available, and I suggest he has a look at it.
We now come to Liv Savile-Roberts.
I'm sure the House will join me in remembering the Llandow air disaster in which 80 people lost their lives 75 years ago. Elaine's hair salon in Llanrug, Pitian Partian Nursery in Llanwnder, care homes and GP surgeries across Dwyfo Meirionnydd. They tell me that national insurance hikes coming in just a few weeks will stop them hiring new staff. Her government says they're cutting welfare to get people into jobs. What jobs?
Plaid Cymru's manifesto for the general election had £5 billion of unfunded commitments. If her party was in power, we'd be facing the same legacy that we had from the party opposite, a £22 billion black hole, which has meant we have had to take difficult decisions. But in her constituency, they will want to have more investment in our NHS, more investment in our public services, more investment to support businesses. Her party voted against it all in the Welsh budget.
Ms Savile Roberts.
And if her government agreed with her counterparts in Cardiff, we would have the money from the Crown Estate as well.
Yeah.
But back in 2015, the Secretary of State and I walked through the same voting lobby against what she then described as despicable Tory welfare cuts. And she dared to break the Labour whip to do so back then. Given this evidence of her strong convictions on the issue, how can she justify remaining in a cabinet intent on implementing Tory-style welfare cuts?
We have inherited a Tory welfare system that is the worst of all worlds. It's got the wrong incentives, it discourages people from working, the people who really need a safety net are still not getting the dignity and support that they need, and the taxpayer is funding an ever-spiralling bill. It's unsustainable, it's indefensible and it's unfair. Our principles for reform are clear: supporting those who need support, restoring trust and fairness in the system, fixing that broken assessment process and disincentives, and supporting people to start, stay and succeed in work. She should support that as well.
Stephen Gaffins.
Two, please, Mr. Speaker.
Secretary of State.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I recently met with the Deputy First Minister to discuss a wide range of issues, including the Crown Estate. The UK and Welsh governments are focused on taking maximum advantage of the opportunities that floating offshore wind in the Celtic Sea presents for Wales, which could create over 5,000 jobs and £1.4 billion of investment to the UK economy in the coming years.
Stephen Gaffin.
Diolch, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in the 2011 SNP manifesto, the SNP committed to have 100% equivalent of Scotland's electricity being generated from renewables. The SNP met that target and then some, thanks to the devolution of the Crown Estate and working with industry that is now delivering jobs and clean green energy to Scotland, but also throughout the UK. Why shouldn't Wales have the same opportunity?
I'm afraid I'm not going to take any lectures on the Crown Estate from his party, whose mismanagement of the Scottish seabed has seen Scottish assets sold off on the cheap. We are focused on doing whatever it takes to secure more than 5,000 jobs in Wales and billions of pounds of investment that the Crown Estate can unlock for Wales.
Okay. Tony Antoniazzi.
Mr. Speaker, does the Secretary of State agree with me that the government's priority should be ensuring that the Crown Estate can unlock thousands of new well-paid jobs in Wales that will come with floating offshore wind, rather than being distracted by calls to devolve the organisation in the middle of this national mission, risking the investment, jobs and lower energy bills Wales desperately needs?
Mr. Speaker, she's absolutely right. I, like her, want to see people in Wales benefit from those 5,300 new jobs, particularly young people who then don't have to leave Wales, where they've grown up, to earn or learn. I want to see that £1.4 billion boost to the economy. We are not prepared to put all of that at risk, the risk of market fragmentation, of undermining or potentially destroying developer confidence in flow, and then have to watch that investment go elsewhere in the world.
John Cooper.
Question number 3, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Speaker. Well, with your permission, I will answer question 3 and question 8 together. I've spoken to farming unions in Wales and understand their strength of feeling. These changes are expected to affect around 500 claims across the whole of the UK, with very few being in Wales. Meanwhile, most importantly, we and the Welsh Government have protected the farming budget at its current level, whilst the Welsh Conservatives tried to block that money from reaching farmers by voting against the Welsh Government budget last week.
Mr. Speaker, the Scotland Office is conducting a series of agricultural roundtables talking directly to farmers and putting together statistics to push back against this orthodoxy that only a tiny number of very wealthy estates are going to be affected. That's simply not the case. This increasingly looks like a war on farmers by the Treasury. What part are you playing in fighting back against this?
Well, Well, Mr. Speaker, the Treasury is absolutely confident in its figures, and specific questions on methodology is a matter for the Treasury. But what I can tell him, and I will repeat it, is expected to only affect 500 claims for agricultural property relief across the whole of the UK, with very few being in Wales. As he knows, we are absolutely committed to our farmers through keeping the £337 million block grant, which Welsh Government has passed on to farmers directly.
Charlie Dewhurst.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Farmers across the UK have already been rocked by the changes to APR and BPR. And yesterday we had the shock news in England that DEFRA will take no new applications for SFI. So what reassurances can the Minister give to farmers in Wales that the sustainable farming scheme will be delivered in full and on time on the 1st of January next year?
Well, as he knows, my good friend, the First Minister of Wales, has spent a lot of time talking to farmers, and we have absolutely protected the budget, and Welsh Government has also protected that budget for farmers, so the full £337 million will be going directly to farmers, in spite of his colleagues in the Senate trying to block it last week.
Select Committee, Ruth Jones. No.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Welsh Affairs Select Committee is launching its inquiry into farming in Wales this week because we know farming is a cornerstone of the Wales economy. Now, the Welsh Government budget contained over £300 million to support Welsh farmers. So does the Minister agree with me that it's a shame the opposition parties are playing fast and loose with farmers' livelihoods by voting against the Welsh Government budget last week?
Well, indeed, Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend, the Chair of the Welsh Affairs Committee, is absolutely right. It was an utter disgrace that the parties opposite decided to vote against the budget last week, which effectively is trying to block money going to the farmers. What a disgrace.
Shall the Secretary of State Mims Davis?
This government have said that they are concerned, like we all are, about our future security. So why is food security expendable in Wales and beyond? That's the message from farmer Stella Owen from NFU Cymru, who termed their actions as destructive and threatens the future of family farms across Wales. Mr. Speaker, how many of those family farms is the Minister prepared to see go under before she and the Secretary of State will step up and act in the interests of this key sector to help worried and frankly livid men and women who are worried and fearing for their livelihoods?
Well, Mr. Speaker, as I'm sure she has been reminded many times, difficult decisions had to be made to fund our public services, but the changes still leave a significant amount of relief in place. Farming parents will typically be able to pass on up to £3 million to their children without paying any inheritance tax at all, and above this amount, inheritance tax will be paid at a reduced effective rate of up to 20% rather than the standard 40%. Estates have up to 10 years to pay any tax due, and this will be interest-free. These payment terms are not available to others. This is a fair and balanced approach that continues support for family farms, whilst also fixing the public services that we rely on, including farmers.
Jones.
Question number 4, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
I have regular discussions with my Welsh Government colleagues about health, and I'm pleased to see clear progress in cancer services in Wales. In December, performance against the 62 day cancer target was the best we've seen since August 2021. But no one should ever be complacent about cancer. And that is why our two governments are absolutely committed to working closely on cancer, to share best practice and to deliver better outcomes for patients across England and Wales.
Clive Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Since August 2020, not a single health board in Wales has met their cancer target, leaving patients waiting months for their referral to start treatment. And despite recommendations to properly implement screening programmes, the standard for uptake is not being achieved, leading to poorer health outcomes. As the Department of Health embark on developing a cancer strategy for England, how will the Secretary of State for Wales ensure these issues are not repeated in England?
Well, what I can tell him is that there is now positive progress on waiting lists. Both governments are working together in a spirit of genuine collaboration to cut NHS waiting lists and build an NHS fit for the future. the Welsh Government have committed more than £600 million in extra funding for health and social care in their budget for 25-26, and they're also setting up a National Cancer Leadership Board to improve cancer care. Thanks to these investments, the Welsh NHS services are improving, including on cancer, and waiting lists are falling.
Curtis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will my honourable friend outline how she is working in partnership with the Welsh Government to improve cancer and health outcomes? And could she try and help me understand why on earth, in the budget vote last week, the Conservatives and Plaid Cymru voted against £600 million more in our Welsh NHS?
I really cannot explain why the Conservative colleagues in the Senate voted against this budget, because not only is the Welsh Government delivering on £600 million, but they are also delivering a specific package on cancer care. And the initial phase, which is going to focus on breast, skin, gynecological, lower gastrointestinal and urological cancer, will improve productivity and efficiency in how health boards deliver care. And this includes sending people straight to test without an outpatient appointment. Alongside this, Welsh Government are implementing a wider range of service improvements, from reducing smoking and tackling obesity to HPV vaccination and diagnostic and genomic strategies.
Number 5, Mr. Speaker. Secretary of State.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Wales has a world-class tourism offer. I fully support the work that the Welsh Government is doing to support the tourism sector in Wales through Visit Wales and other initiatives. Last month, the UK Government announced a £15 million investment for Venue Cymru in Llandudno and the Newport Transporter Bridge. These are two key projects that will help boost the tourism and culture sector in Wales.
Thank her for her answer. The tourism and hospitality sector in the UK is one of the most heavily taxed in Europe. Will she press the Chancellor to reduce the tax burden in this area to help drive local economies that rely on tourism in Wales and in constituencies like mine on the Isle of Wight?
I would gently remind the gentleman opposite that his party in government put the highest tax burden in 70 years on the people and businesses of this country, leaving a £22 billion black hole that we have had to try and sort out.
Henry Tufnell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. More than 40 countries and holiday destinations around the world have introduced a form of visitor levy, including Greece, Amsterdam, Barcelona and California. So can the Secretary of State outline the work she is doing with the Welsh Government to support our vital tourism industry?
The honourable member has one of the most beautiful constituencies in Wales, and I know tourism is very critical for his local economy. Indeed, probably tourism remains the only way to see a Conservative MP in Wales after the general election. The visitor levy is set to raise up to £33 million for tourism sector across Wales. Last week, Conservatives in the Senedd voted to block £15.6 million in support for Welsh tourism.
So, Secretary of State Liz Davis.
Sadly, there will be no more Easter family fun at Oakwood. They've made it clear that their final demise after COVID was Labour's looming tourism tax, job tax and sky-high business rates from the Senedd, meaning it's all over. Mr. Speaker, how many more tourist and hospitality businesses need to tell the UK Government that their closed signs will be going up and staying up due to decisions made by the Treasury? Will this Secretary of State stand up for businesses and jobs in Wales who know they are being taken for the worst ride possible, frankly even more vomit-inducing than megaphobia, by this government of broken promises?
Last week, her colleagues in the Senedd voted against extra money for tourism. They did. Now, maybe she should have a conversation with Darren Miller in the Senedd, her colleague, but I don't think they're having that sort of conversation at the moment because they're still arguing about who's leading the Tories in Wales.
Douglas McAllister.
Question number 6, please, Mr. Speaker.
Secretary of State.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I regularly meet with the First Minister to discuss a wide range of matters, including NHS waiting lists. The latest data shows positive progress in reducing long waiting times and the size of the waiting list, thanks to investment by both the UK and Welsh governments.
Douglas McAllister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I'm appalled to hear that Plaid Cymru voted against £600 million extra investment to bring down NHS waiting lists in Wales. But I'm afraid to say this is a familiar story for our Scottish members. Does the Secretary of State agree with me that nationalist parties will always prioritise niche constitutional distractions over delivering priorities for working families, what they need and what they deserve?
Mr Speaker, I couldn't agree more with my honourable friends, and Plaid Cymru members are going to have to explain to their constituents why they voted against £600 million extra for the NHS last week, blocking crucial funding, reaching our hospitals, NHS staff and patients in Wales.
Jim Shannon.
Mr Speaker, Minister, one of the issues for the waiting lists in Wales, as it is in all of the United Kingdom, are those who have been waiting for diabetes diagnosis, number one, and then the treatment. There used to be in Westminster a strategy that encompassed just not England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. Would the Minister support a similar strategy for the four regions together to address the issue of diabetes and what it's doing to this country?
I thank the honourable gentleman for his question. Can I just say nations and regions rather than just regions? But I'm very happy to have a discussion with him outside the chamber about that.
Graham Ledbetter.
Question number 7, please, Mr Speaker.
Minister.
Our United Kingdom is going from strength to strength and is underpinned by a transformed relationship between the UK and devolved governments. In Wales, this means a partnership between our two governments which is delivering on the issues that matter most to people, on reforming the NHS and public services and attracting investment and new jobs through free ports, investment zones and our industrial strategy.
Graham Ledbetter.
Thank you. Thank the Minister for that answer. Today the Senate will vote on a motion to redesignate HS2 as an England-only project. Previous calculations suggest that Wales missed out on around £4 billion from the project, but Welsh ministers now claim that amount is £431 million. Quite the difference. With the Welsh Government abandoning its ambitions and the UK Government refusing to budge on full consequential funding, is the Labour Party now waving the white flag on Wales missing billions?
Well, the government absolutely acknowledges that the previous Conservative government shortchanged Wales for years on rail investment, including because of HS2. And one of our top priorities is to reverse those years of historic underfunding in Wales. This is infrastructure. So the Secretary of State met the Transport Secretary and Welsh Government Transport Minister Ken States immediately before Christmas, where they agreed on a direction of travel which we hope will deliver new investment for rail in Wales. The UK and Welsh governments have agreed a prioritisation of rail improvement projects developed by the Wales Rail Board. This will inform our respective departments' work in the run-up to the spring spending review.
John.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Investment into Wales by the UK Government demonstrates the strength of the Union, and I was therefore delighted to see the UK Labour Government announce its plan for neighbourhoods that will see £100 million invested in Welsh communities, with £20 million of that going into my constituency of Wrexham, straight into vital local resources like high streets and youth clubs. Will the Secretary of State agree with me that this Labour Government is committed to bringing growth to areas of Wales that were previously ignored by the party opposite?
Well, indeed, with UK Government and Welsh Government working together, we've secured more than £1.5 billion investment and hundreds of jobs in Wales. And, of course, we've established those investment in zones in Cardiff, Newport, Wrexham and Flintshire to provide a rocket boost to sector strengths like advanced manufacturing.
Sir Ashley Fox.
Question number 9.
Minister.
UK Government has delivered the biggest budget settlement in the history of devolution, with £21 billion of new money for the Welsh Government. The Welsh Government is investing almost £200 million this year to support school standards across Wales, plus a further almost £170 million next year. But his Welsh Conservative colleagues tried to block this funding by voting against the Welsh Government budget last week.
Sir Ashley Fox.
I'm grateful, Mr Speaker. Children in Wales have the lowest PISA scores in the United Kingdom, and are significantly below the OECD average. Does the Minister believe this could be related in any way to 26 years of Labour government in Wales?
Well, I'll take no lectures from the party opposite. The Conservative attack rings absolutely hollow, given the chronic underfunding of education and public services for the last 14 years when they have been in power. Now, the UK and Welsh governments are working together to ensure every young person has the opportunity to succeed, including by investing over 260 million extra in education and more than 260 million for local government to set school budgets in Wales. In spite of the shenanigans of Plaid and the Conservatives voting against the Welsh Government's budget, Labour are getting on and delivering certainty and support for teachers across Wales through increases to education and local authority budgets.
Jill German, final question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does my right honourable friend welcome, as I do, the additional £20 million announced by Welsh Government last week to improve education standards, on top of the £262 million extra in total for education in Wales? And is she as perplexed as I am as to why the Conservatives and Plaid Cymru voted against extra money for education in the Welsh budget?
Well, like her, I'm absolutely astounded the way that the Plaid Cymru and Conservative Senate members voted against the budget. But the important thing is that this year the Welsh Government will be investing an additional £1.1 million for literacy, numeracy and science support in schools. And we've also, the Welsh Government's also announced investment of a £10 million package on literacy and numeracy for the coming year, increasing local capacity to support schools, national support programmes and interventions to support struggling learners.
Right, that completes Welsh questions. We now come to questions to the Prime Minister. Mike Martin.
Question number 1, Mr. Speaker.
Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the progress in talks between Ukraine and the United States. We must now redouble our efforts to get a lasting, secure peace. And, Mr. Speaker, on Saturday, I'll convene international leaders to discuss how we can make further progress. Can I also pay tribute to the bravery and dedication of all those responding to the ship collision off the East Yorkshire coast? Our thoughts, and I'm sure of the whole House, are with the family of the crew member who is sadly presumed dead. Mr. Speaker, this week we introduced landmark legislation to get Britain building, paving the way to restoring the dream of home ownership for working people across the country. We're also driving forward our Employment Rights Bill, the biggest boost to workers' rights in a generation. That's our plan for change in action. This morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Mike Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Russia has abducted at least 19,000 Ukrainian children and transferred them to Russia. They have been told that their parents don't love them, they've been placed in Russian homes, and they have been re-educated. For this despicable crime and others, the International Criminal Court has issued 6 arrest warrants for Vladimir Putin and his gang. I note the Prime Minister's previous fulsome support for the ICC, and I also note his comments just last night about the support that the UK will offer to Ukraine in achieving a just and lasting peace. Will the Prime Minister confirm to the House that British peacekeeping troops will only be deployed to Ukraine if the peacekeeping deal includes both the return of Ukraine's children and Putin's prosecution?
Well, Mr. Speaker, firstly, I thank him for raising this issue because it is an absolutely terrible case of abduction and kidnapping. And when we say a lasting, just settlement or peace in Ukraine, it must, of course, involve dealing with this issue, and we are, as he would expect, raising it continually with our allies.
John Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Telford and Britain voted for change in July, yet this week we saw the bizarre spectacle of the Conservatives attempting to bring back the Rwanda policy, clinging onto a gimmick that cost the British taxpayers £700 million, yet only sent 4 volunteers to Rwanda. As Labour works to secure our borders through our plan for change, does the Prime Minister agree with me? It's quite clear the party opposite have done absolutely nothing.
Well, he's quite right. They ran an open borders experiment that saw numbers go up to almost 1 million. And the leader of the opposition was the cheerleader, thanking herself for the lobbying that she did. The Rwanda scheme, yes, Mr. Speaker, £700 million of taxpayers' money to remove 4 volunteers. What a contrast. We've got the flights off. 19,000 people removed who shouldn't be here. As with the NHS, with prisons, the economy, everything else, we're clearing up the mess that they lost.
Leader of the opposition, can be better off.
Later today, the Prime Minister is meeting the family of Sir David Amess. Sir David gave this House and our country 40 years of service. I hope the Prime Minister will agree that getting the response to his murder right is vital, not just to his family, but to our democracy. Mr. Speaker, every week I speak to businesses who are letting go of staff or closing. Has the Prime Minister been given an estimate of how many people will lose their jobs because of his budget?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, just on the question of Sir David, he was a deeply loved and respected colleague, and behind me is the plaque, as is the plaque to Joe Cox in front of me. And I know this was deeply felt by the House, but particularly, as I acknowledged at the time, by the party opposite, who lost a colleague and a friend in the most awful of circumstances. Mr. Speaker, I am meeting the Amess family later on today, and will make sure that they get answers to the questions that they ask. Mr. Speaker, in relation to businesses, I'm really pleased to say we've got thousands of new jobs into the economy. We've got more investment in the last 20 years, an absolute record. Wages are up higher than prices. 3 interest rate cuts, the best boost for the cost of living for a very long time.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister needs to get out more. Inflation is up, and estimates of job losses are between 130,000 and 300,000. Okay. His tax rises are hurting every sector of the economy. Things are getting worse for nurseries. Nurseries are writing to stressed parents right now, telling them that fees will go up because of his jobs tax. Can he explain how more expensive childcare is good for the economy or for working families struggling to make ends meet?
Well, Mr. Speaker, we're putting in childcare. Look at the breakfast clubs, 2 in her constituency. But she's rather forgetting the £22 billion black hole that they left, that we had to deal with. That's why we had to take the necessary but right measures we did in the budget. And what's her response? Not that she'd reverse them. Oh, no, she doesn't say that. She attacks what we've done, but she doesn't say she would reverse it, because she wants all the benefits of our budget in returns of investment, but she doesn't want to pay for it. That's how we got into the mess in the first place.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister is out of touch, because he should know that nurseries are charging over £2,000 for full-time care. That's £24,000 a year after tax, and he's talking about 60p breakfast clubs. He has no idea what people out there are experiencing, and it is not just the families. Even councils must pay his jobs tax. To cope with it, the average council tax bill is increasing by over £100 in April, after he promised to freeze it. Hard-working families' money is going to the Chancellor instead of social care and fixing potholes. Why should these families pay more for less?
Well, she really shouldn't denigrate what she calls, I think, 60p breakfast clubs. She should be welcoming them. And she asked about council tax, Mr. Speaker. The Tories put up council tax every year for 12 years. Their manifesto, Tory LGA manifesto, government should remove the caps on council tax. And then Hampshire Council, Tory, wanted a 15% increase. We said no. Slough Council, again, Mr. Speaker, Tory, wanted 3%. We said no. Windsor and Maidenhead, Tory, now Lib Dem, wanted 25%. We said no. We're the ones that are doing the right things to get this country on the right track.
Mr. Speaker, the point is he promised to freeze, and they are going up. And if he wants to talk about councils, let's look at Liverpool or maybe Birmingham, where the rubbish is piling up so high, people vote Labour and all they get is trash, just like what he's saying at the dispatch box. People all over the country are suffering, not just in Birmingham. Millions of elderly people have had their winter fuel payments snatched away. At the same time, care home fees are set to go up by a devastating £3,000 because of his jobs tax. How does he expect pensioners on a fixed income to make ends meet?
Mr. Speaker, this is why it's so important that wages are up higher than prices. That's why it's so important that the interest rates are coming down. This is the biggest boost for the cost of living for a very, very long time. What we're doing is picking up and fixing the mess that they left.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister is not looking at what is happening out there. Every day I speak to businesses who are telling us that they think that they are going bust. And as if businesses and families didn't have enough to worry about, supermarkets say food prices will increase by over 4% because of the jobs tax. And that's before we get to the immoral family farms tax on the very farmers who work so hard to produce our food. What does the Prime Minister have against farmers anyway? Does he not see that his budget is killing farming in this country and he is making life so much harder for everyone else?
Mr. Speaker, the budget provided £5 billion for farming over the next 2 years. That is a record amount. We've set out the roadmap for farming, which has been welcomed by farmers. And many thousands of farms have benefited from the farming schemes. But she talks about prices. Wages are going up higher than prices. That's the first in a long time that's happened. So for families across the country, they're better off under Labour.
He's got no answers today. What the farmers are complaining about is the sustainable farming incentive, which he has just scrapped or withdrawn. They are making mistakes with this budget. And that's why in 2 weeks, the Chancellor will come to this House to present an emergency budget the Prime Minister said we would not need. They will try and make out it's because of global events, but the truth is they trash the economy with their bad choices. They said they'd look after pensioners. Then they snatched winter fuel payments. They said that they would be pro-business, but they hiked taxes on jobs. And he, Mr. Speaker, he promised to freeze council tax, but it's going up by £100. This is a high-tax, low-growth, job-killing government. Will he use the emergency budget to fix the mess he's made?
Mr. Speaker, inflation under them 11%, £22 billion black hole, a mini budget that made us the laughing stock of the world, and they want to give lectures on the economy to us. No, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With 1 in 8 young people across the country not in education, employment or training, people in Rugby are worried about a wasted generation. Too many people with disabilities and health conditions are not getting the help that they need to get into work. So will the Prime Minister set out how this government will give everyone who is able to work the support they need, provide compassion to those who can't work, and fix the broken welfare system left behind by, you guessed it, the Conservatives?
I thank him for raising this issue. Mr. Speaker, I come from a family that dealt with disability through my mother and brother over many years, so I do understand the concerns that have been raised by him. But we inherited a system which is broken, it is indefensible economically and morally, and we must and we will reform it. We will have clear principles, Mr. Speaker. We will protect those who need protecting. We will also support those who can work back to work. But Labour is the party of work. We are also the party of equality and fairness.
Leader of the Liberal Democrats, Sir Ed Davey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to begin by giving a shout-out for Young Carers Action Day today, but I promise the House I will not sing. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has rightly spoken about the need to get more people into work, and he repeated that now, so people have more dignity, we can get the economy going, and we can cut the benefits bill after the disgraceful legacy left by the Conservatives.
You were there for 5 years.
But does the Prime Minister recognise that for many disabled people, the best way to help them into work is to support them properly with more special equipment, with training, with better healthcare and so on? And will he also today calm anxieties that he himself has raised for many of us, that the disability benefits for people who simply cannot work will not be cut?
Mr. Speaker, we will, of course, as I've just said, the principles, we will, of course, support those who need support, but also help those who can work into work. They'll be the guiding principles. But what we've inherited is shocking, and they ought to be silent. 1 in 8 young people not in education, work or training. That is a lost generation. That is their inheritance. They've got plenty to say now. They did nothing for 14 years and left this in terrible inheritance.
And Davey, Mr. Speaker, turning to international issues, can I congratulate the Prime Minister on helping to secure the restoration of US military and intelligence support for Ukraine? But can I press him on progress to persuade President Trump against damaging metal tariffs already hitting British industry? The Prime Minister knows that we on these benches believe he must be more robust with President Trump, like the Europeans and like the Canadians. So will the Prime Minister fly out to Canada as soon as possible to show their new Prime Minister and the Canadian people that Britain stands with its Commonwealth allies against Trump's threats and against Trump's tariffs?
Well, Canada is an ally and a very important ally too, and I've spoken to our allies on many occasions about the situation in Canada. On the question of tariffs, obviously, like everybody else, I'm disappointed to see global tariffs in relation to steel and aluminium. But we will take a pragmatic approach. We are, as he knows, negotiating an economic deal which covers and will include tariffs if we succeed, but we will keep all options on the table.
Claire Hannah.
Hi, Fadra Conadív agus Seach na Gaeilge Fásta Deis Con Changa agus our culture Kellaroo or Fodandone. Happy St Patrick's Day, everybody, and happy Irish Language Week as well. An opportunity to use Irish language and culture across the world. It's an increasingly turbulent world, Prime Minister, with relationships and norms turned upside down over recent weeks, and that's why I congratulate the Prime Minister and the Taoiseach for re-establishing warm and firm relationships at their summit last week. And it's reassuring for all of us to know that whatever our constitutional future, that bond is lasting and refreshed. Will the Prime Minister join me in wishing a happy St Patrick's Day to all who value our shared bonds? And can I take this opportunity to invite him to Belfast in August 2027, which was announced this week as the host of the Fleadh na HÉireann for the first time?
Well, can I join her in wishing everybody celebrating a very happy St Patrick's Day? Mr. Speaker, she's right. We need a strong and settled relationship between the United Kingdom and Ireland, and the need for that has never been greater, which is why I was delighted to host the Taoiseach in Liverpool last week at our first annual UK-Ireland Summit. We've turned the page, started a new era for our relationship with Ireland, and I'd be very happy to go to Belfast in 2027. I want to go much sooner than that.
Andrew Stowe.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. In just 20 days' time, new sentencing guidance will come into effect that the Justice Secretary has already conceded will be two-tier in its nature. It will mean that the colour of your skin or the religion you have can give you leniency in the eyes of the law and will plunge public confidence in the judiciary into crisis. But it is avoidable. We Conservatives have tabled a bill that, if backed on Friday, can stop this guidance in its tracks. So will the Prime Minister will he now overrule his Justice Secretary and confirm here and now that he will back this bill, or will he simply step aside and prove he has in fact been two-tier Keir all along?
Well, everyone should be equal before the law. That is why the Lord Chancellor has taken up the issue with the Sentencing Council. But he needs to do his homework, because the proposal that he complains about was drafted in 2024, and the last government was consulted. And when they were consulted, what did they say? They said they welcomed the proposal. Now, Mr. Speaker, I understand that the Shadow Justice Secretary is taking the Sentencing Council to court. Perhaps he should add himself as the second defendant so we can get to the bottom of the
Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I'm very proud to represent a constituency that has 8 synagogues, a thriving Jewish population, and the UK's largest Jewish cultural centre, JW3. But this week, I was horrified to read reports about rising anti-Semitism on NHS wards, and in particular, a shocking incident in which a Jewish NHS staff member was called a baby killer by their colleague. The NHS that I know and love is open to everyone, regardless of their background. So could I ask the Prime Minister, what is he doing to ensure that my Jewish constituents can safely use our beloved National Health Service?
Well, I thank her for raising these deeply concerning reports. It is completely unacceptable for anyone to experience racism, discrimination or prejudice in the health service. I know my right honourable friend, the Health Secretary, takes such reports extremely seriously. It is a fundamental principle that the NHS provides care and treatment for everyone, regardless of race, faith or background. This is a really serious issue. You've let yourself down, you know it. I expect all trusts and healthcare providers to take necessary action against any staff who've expressed views that do not reflect the views and values of the NHS.
Dave Dugan, a closed question.
Question 9, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, he asked about UK-US relations. As he knows, and the House knows, I'm committed to strengthening those relations. The US is an indispensable ally. We are working together to try to secure a just and lasting peace in Ukraine. And I've spoken to the President on a number of occasions, including this week.
Dave Dugan.
I agree with the Prime Minister in those sentiments. The ceasefire negotiations this week are a cause for great optimism, and I welcome the efforts that the Prime Minister's National Security Advisor, Jonathan Powell, had done in leading that priority. But last week at the dispatch box, the Prime Minister said in answer to my right honourable friend, the member for Aberdeen South, that he had no knowledge of the United States planning to withdraw military aid from Ukraine, yet they did that the following day. It's against that backdrop, because I know the Prime Minister wants a just and lasting peace in Ukraine that respects Ukraine's borders and territorial integrity. When he's impressing that priority upon the President of the United States, what reassurance can he give the House today that the President of the United States is actually listening?
Let me give this reassurance. As soon as that step was taken, I and my team started work to try and ensure that we could get back to a situation of full support for Ukraine. I won't detail everything that was involved over the last week. I can assure him and the House a huge amount of hard work, discussions and diplomacy was used with all of our allies and others to ensure that we could get yesterday to go as well as we hoped it would. I am pleased that we've made progress. I think that's very important for Ukraine, and I'm extremely pleased that support has been put in, backed by the US, for Ukraine. So that's what I did once I understood what had happened. I'm pleased with where we've got to, but as ever, we must go further.
Richard Bergen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Disabled people in my constituency are frightened. And they're frightened because they're again hearing politicians use the language of tough choices. And they know from bitter experience that when politicians talk about tough choices, It means the easy option of making the poor and vulnerable pay. So instead of cutting benefits for disabled people, wouldn't the moral thing to do, the courageous thing to do, be to make a real tough choice and introduce a wealth tax on the very wealthiest people in our society?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the party opposite left a broken welfare system which locks millions out of work. That is indefensible, in my view, economically and morally. Of course, we need to support people who need support. We need to help those who want to work to get back into work, and I think there's a moral imperative in that. He talks about a wealth tax. We have raised money, the energy profits levy, taxing non-doms and air passenger duty on private jets. But this isn't a bottomless pit, and we must kick-start growth to get the economic stability that we need.
Sir Geoffrey Clifton-Brown.
Most people would accept that we need more housing in this country, yet so often it's not accompanied by the necessary infrastructure. In my own constituency, thousands of houses are proposed, yet without the £250 million to upgrade Junction 12 of the M5, the inspector is likely to rule our plan unsound. So will the Prime Minister use his upcoming planning and infrastructure bill to see how developer and landowner contributions can more effectively build this vitally needed infrastructure which would benefit communities up and down the country?
Well, he's right. We have to get the houses built that we need in his constituency and elsewhere, something that the party opposite failed to do. That's why we've introduced the infrastructure bill, which I think he welcomes, and that bill will get Britain building so we can deliver on those 1.5 million new homes through our plan for change. In relation to the particular issue he raises, I know that he and my honourable friend, the member for Stroud, have been working together to try to resolve this issue as I understand it, and I'm happy to ensure he gets a meeting with the relevant minister if that would help in taking it further.
Sure, Jean Joseph.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I commend this Labour government's landmark reforms to get Britain building through our plan for change? I look forward to working with ministers to ensure developers deliver on what they promise to local residents so that new homes also have access to roads, GP surgeries and dentists and don't create an extra burden on hospitals like the William Harvey Hospital in my Ashford constituency. What is the Prime Minister's message to the blockers standing in the way of the homes and vital infrastructure our country needs?
Well, he's a dedicated campaigner for his constituents. Well, we know who's been standing in the way for the past 14 years. It's the party opposite, and they've learned absolutely nothing. The leader of the opposition claims that she's never opposed growth or development. That's not what she's telling her constituents, Mr. Speaker. Only last month she wrote in her newsletter that she'll keep working with Conservative colleagues to block a vital energy infrastructure project in her own backyard. She's not alone. The Shadow Foreign Secretary, Shadow Defence Secretary, Shadow DEFRA, they're all at it. What a bunch of blockers.
Sir Ashley Fox.
Mr. Speaker, the Employment Rights Bill will grant union equality representatives the right to paid time off work.
Then it does.
Will the Prime Minister grant special constables the right to take unpaid leave to perform their duties?
I'm grateful to him for raising the question of special constables who play a very important role in our communities and keeping us safe. The numbers of special constables dropped under the last government. We support the existing employer-supported policing scheme and will support our special constables, but they dropped under the last government.
Andy MacDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Long time.
I recently visited Middlesbrough's James Cook University Hospital and learned of the brilliant work in the neurosciences department for the survivors of stroke, brain and spinal injuries and many others. But it only has 18 rehabilitation beds to serve a population of some 1.4 million people, whereas the guidelines say it needs 80 beds, meaning that patients in the Tees Valley do not get the rehabilitation they need. So will the government remedy the position by ensuring that resources are allocated to meet the ambition to develop a world-class new rehabilitation centre to serve the Tees Valley and beyond?
Well, I thank him for his question. It is important to hear about the important work that James Cook Hospital is doing in his constituency. We are investing £350,000 in research on interventions which support people with functional neurological disorders to rehabilitate them within the community. And of course our plan for change invested £25 billion to cut waiting lists, speed up treatment and shift more care into the community. In relation to the hospital, I'll make sure he gets a meeting with the Minister to see what further can be done.
Sir John Whittington.
Will the Prime Minister look at the case of my constituents, Mr and Mrs Adrian Fenton, who returned home from visiting France in their motorhome to discover an illegal immigrant concealed in the bike rack? They reported it immediately to the police, only to receive a fine from the Border Force of £1,500. Will he agree that my constituents ought to be thanked rather than punished? And does he accept that this action will send a message to deter anybody from acting responsibly in the future?
Can I thank him for raising this important case on behalf of his constituents? I've seen some of the details and I am concerned about it, and I do think it's important, as he says, that the Home Office look into it, and therefore we will do so, and I'll make sure that he is updated in relation to that in due course.
Peter Dowd.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Veterans in Sefton, one of the many remarkable charities in my constituency, indicate that statistics can only partly measure the price paid by servicemen and women. Incidents of broken marriages, suicides, alcoholism, deep depression and homelessness among veterans remain largely unquantified. Given that, will my right honourable friend restate Labour's commitment to providing our veterans the holistic support they need and deserve?
Well, we owe an extraordinary debt to our veterans, Mr Speaker. We are committed to renewing the nation's contract with those who've served, and that includes the guarantees of homes for heroes for those who have served, dedicated mental and physical healthcare pathways in the NHS, and dedicated to sport to help those leaving service using their skills to find new and fulfilling careers.
Sarah Dyke.
Yesterday, with no notice, DEFRA closed SFI applications, leaving thousands of farmers who want to deliver public goods waiting for a year without support. So can the Prime Minister assure British farmers that they won't be left stranded and able to support environmental and food resilience goals due to lack of government support?
Well, Mr Speaker, as she knows, the SFI schemes have operated to provide quite considerable support so far. There have been a number of schemes. They've closed in the past, and then a new scheme has been put in place. They were closed in 2022 and 2023 by the party opposite without the 6 weeks' notice. But we do support farmers. We will be putting forward more details at the spending review. But the difference, Mr Speaker, in this government is we're funding the farmers. They failed to spend the budget.
Sultana.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. In October 2023, in an interview with LBC, the Prime Minister said, and I quote, "I think Israel does have that right," when asked if cutting off power and water to Gaza was appropriate. For 11 days now, Israel has blocked the entry of vital goods and aid into Gaza, subjecting over 2 million people to collective punishment and starvation. Israel's decision to also cut off electricity to a plant supplying drinking water to 500,000 people is yet another blatant violation of international law and further evidence of genocide against the Palestinian people. In light of these facts, does the Prime Minister still maintain that Israel is not committing genocide?
Look, I'm really appalled by Israel blocking aid when it is needed at greater volume and speed than it's ever been needed. Blocking goods and supplies and power entering Gaza risks breaching international humanitarian law, and it shouldn't be happening. And we are doing everything we can to alleviate that situation.
Sir Julian Lewis.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. In his extremely important upcoming discussions with other nations about Ukraine, will the Prime Minister focus on the fact that it was standard Russian procedure to take over other countries by having bogus elections and installing puppet governments? And will he therefore impress on other colleagues to be very wary of calls to hold elections in Ukraine during a wartime situation, which could result in the subversion and takeover by Russia of the entire country?
Thank you for raising a really important point, and the track record is there for all to see. On top of that, of course, we in this country did not hold elections when we were at war. That is a perfectly reasonable and normal course of behaviour. And yes, of course, that has to be part of our discussions as we go forward, including the meeting that I'm convening on Saturday.
Lord Hatton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. South Dorset is ready to play its part, making Britain a clean energy superpower. But after 14 years of Conservative failure, there are many untapped opportunities on our doorstep. Green investment opportunities such as Portwind, Moorwind and a hydrogen storage hub are all coming down the track. So can the Prime Minister reassure my constituents that the Government will work with the Crown Court on these projects, invest in key infrastructure and ensure that South Dorset's green energy potential is hardwired into our plan for change?
Well, I thank him. He's absolutely right about making Britain a clean energy superpower. We are committing £2.3 billion to support hydrogen projects, and I recognise the huge potential of South Dorset to become home to a storage hub. We're ensuring public and private investment works together, and that's exactly what the Crown Estate Act does, unlocking significant investment, boosting offshore wind and kick-starting economic growth.
Andrew Rossendale.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the Leader of the Opposition has already mentioned, later today the Prime Minister will meet the family of our dear late colleague, Sir David Amess, who was so brutally murdered at his constituency surgery 3.5 years ago. I plead with the Prime Minister to reverse the decision to deny the family a public inquiry, despite similar inquiries being held into other tragic instances. So, will he please stop this shameful saga and heed the call of the Amess family for a judge-led public inquiry into David's death and the related failure of the Prevent programme from a heartbroken family?
Can I acknowledge just how heartbroken they are? It's difficult to imagine what they've gone through, what they continue to go through. And that's why it's very important that I meet them this afternoon, which I will do, and discuss with them all the questions they want to raise with me. Sir David was a respected and loved a colleague across this House, and as I say, I absolutely understand how his family must feel about the tragic circumstances in which he died and then everything that followed thereafter.
Final question, Chris Cage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Tomorrow marks 29 years since 16 children and their teacher were murdered at Dunblane Primary School. In recent weeks, my constituents have raised with me the alarming fact that adverts offering handguns for sale are appearing on technology platforms like Google and YouTube. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that technology companies have an obligation to all of us to do everything proactively possible to prevent illegal advertising of this kind and not rely on a reactive, will remove it when it's reported approach, which is simply not good enough?
The thoughts, I'm sure, of the whole House are with the victims of the Dunblane massacres 29 years after the tragic event. The Online Safety Act will require online services to proactively remove such content from their platforms and prevent it appearing there in the first place. These duties fully take effect from Monday, and then we'll make sure that all companies meet their obligations.
That completes Prime Minister's questions.